Salutations. I'd just like to preface this video by saying that I have never and will never express my overarching opinions and views or stance on the current Israel-Palestinian war, mainly because, well, it makes absolutely no difference to anyone, and secondly, because of everything that I'm about to talk about in this video. I also really enjoy the fact that whenever I talk about anything political, I have a bunch of comments calling me a woke SJW feminist BLMer, and another bunch of comments calling me a transphobic British Candace Owens. I would very much like to keep that mystery and hilarious energy alive. Thank you so much for giving me the time of day, and without any further ado, let us begin. Last week, Polish artist Igor Dąbrowski uploaded a video of himself conducting a solo protest outside Auschwitz-Birkenau. He was draped in the Palestinian flag and holding a sign that read, "We see your and Israel is committing in Gaza." If you don't know, and just based on how liberally the word is being used nowadays, I feel it very important to reiterate. Auschwitz-Birkenau was the most infamous and largest extermination camp run by the Third Reich, and was a key site for the sole intention of eradicating not just Europe's, but eventually the world's Jewish population. By 1945, 1 million Jews were slaughtered at Auschwitz-Birkenau alone. Following unanimous applause from his largely European audience, Igor's video was criticized by Palestinian human rights activist Ihab Hassan. As a Palestinian, I don't understand why Western activists feel the need to show solidarity with our cause by protesting at Holocaust memorials or concentration camps. These places are intended to commemorate the victims of the most tragic event in human history, not to serve as sites for political protests. This is just one instance of something that has exploded in popularity since October 2023, and I would say in the last few months has really seen an uptick. And I think that this explosion as well as uptick is down to two main reasons. Firstly, the growing prioritization of virtue signaling online, especially as a way to alleviate a sense of powerlessness, which many, particularly young people who are exposed to the hyper complexities of reality, feel. And as a result, the social mediaification of politics has regrettably turned many real, heartbreaking, and complex realities into aesthetics. And this has allowed many who have absolutely no ties whatsoever to particular causes or realities to cosplay identities that reinforce an ideological divide between the oppressed and the oppressors. It therefore becomes perfectly valid for multi-millionaire live streamers or rich, privileged Ivy League students to feign actual oppression or an allegiance to oppression and hardship because their ideological position tells them that they are on the right side of history. They are for the oppressed. Sophia, 24, said she couldn't think of a better way to end her college years than protesting with her fellow Columbia classmates. Unfortunately, being Gen Z means dealing with repeated states of the world that are in absolute hostility and turmoil. My grandparents helped hide Jews fleeing southern Italy in railway tunnels and then lived in those tunnels for weeks, eating dirt and grass until American soldiers came through. You bought a kefir from Amazon and glamped for a week on the middle of Manhattan. The diluting of historically complex realities to overly simplistic buzzwords is a core issue with what I would call the endemic of narcissistic performative activism that is proving itself to do more harm than good.
Hi K-pop stans, I'm here today and asking y'all to boycott Eric Nam for his actions and his stance on the Israel and Palestine conflict.
I want the rebels to know that I'm alive, that I'm in District 8, where the Capitol just bombed a hospital filled with unarmed men, women, and children, and there will be no survivors. If you think for 1 second that the Capitol will ever treat us fairly, you are lying to yourselves, because we know who they are and what they do. This is what they do, and we must fight back. I have a message for President Snow. You can torture us and bomb us and burn our districts to the ground, but do you see that? Fire is catching. And if we burn, you burn with us.
And of course, it is only human to try to simplify that which is complex, that which is difficult and overwhelming, those things that are beyond our realm of basic knowledge and control. But it is a catastrophic failure of the modern human ability to learn, to rationalize, and to seek out the underlying complexities of information, to choose out of ease simplicity. Virtue signaling is the perfect example of how so many have chosen ease and convenience whilst pretending, or in some cases genuinely believing themselves to have chosen true activism and truth-seeking.
New note. Humans are not truth-seeking machines. Humans treat truth as instrumental, meaning it is a tool to be utilized to further someone's personal happiness. When the tool is no longer serving that purpose, it will be abandoned in favor of another tool.
Because, yes, sadly, truth is really just instrumental, and increasingly more so as time goes on social media. This choosing of ease and convenience is at the root of the disgusting rise of anti-Semitism throughout modern democratic societies. And this is not to say that anti-Semitism hasn't always been prevalent in modern societies, but rather that the blatant openness of it, not just in general society, but within academic institutions, is a very telling development, as well as the rather eerie and downright hypocritical rise of anti-white racism and bigotry, which is okay, I guess.
You're just a white person. You're a white person. We don't like white people. Oh. Free Palestine!
So I personally donated 10K because I think it is worthwhile. And if you guys got some extra bread, I would recommend you donate. But I won't throw it on you, you know what I mean? No thanks. And some people are going to say that, you know what I mean? That's why it's the difference.
This is a cracker take.
About whether that's worthwhile.
These were masters who were white supremacists. What is a Zionist? A white supremacist. And so let's be very clear here. I'm not saying that I'm going to go out and start Zionists. What I'm saying is that if an individual who identifies as a Zionist threatens my physical safety in person, i.e. puts their hands on me, I am going to defend myself. And in that case scenario, it may come to a point where I don't know when to stop. Does that make sense? And so if we can agree as a society, as a collective, that people, some persons need to if they have an ideology that results in the death of thousands, hundreds of thousands, millions, if there are people like that who exist, shouldn't they? Why would we want people who are supporters of genocide to live? I'm confused. Zionists, along with all white supremacists, need to not exist because they actively and harm vulnerable people. They stop the world from progressing. Oh, okay. Thank you.
The fact that calling out such deplorable behavior and conduct gets you branded as a Zionist, and not in a good sense, or as an anti-Palestinian colonial oppressor is most telling of how extreme, irrational, and lacking in any modicum of critical thinking this performative activism is. In fact, this performative activism has gone so far that it has proved completely ineffectual in doing anything beyond looking like high school clique antics.
This is what they do. Everybody look at this. Look at this. I'm a UCLA student. I deserve to go here. We pay tuition. This is our school. And they're not letting me walk in. My class is over there. I want to use that entrance. Why can't they go? Will you let me go in? This could be over in a second. Just let me and my friends go in to class.
We're not engaging in that.
Then you can move. Will you move?
We're not engaging in that.
Okay, we're going. We're going. I'm going in. I have my hands up. I'm not hurting them. I'm not hurting them. That's what they do. That's what they do, everybody. You guys are promoting aggression You guys are promoting hate. We're UCLA students, we deserve to be there.
This entire clip gives off a, you can't use this bathroom because we, the new popular kids, said you can't, whilst we wear our matching keffiyeh from our friend's Etsy shop. This viral clip has actually skyrocketed the student into a fully fledged pro-Israeli student activist. So counterintuitively, this is doing wonders for Palestine, I suppose. Take satirical performance artist Crackhead Barney.
I like the confrontation. I want that reaction. The worse, the better, because that's what makes good TV. Do I consider myself to be a content creator and influencer? Yeah, sure.
Who, like many online, is using the hashtag Free Palestine to determine whether celebrities or ordinary people are morally good or bad.
Alec, can you please say Free Palestine one time? Why did you kill that lady? You killed that lady and got no jail time? No jail time, Alec? No jail time, Alec. You're putting innocent people in jail, Alec Baldwin. I'm so sorry. Free Palestine, Alec, just one time, and I'll leave you alone. I'll leave you alone, I swear. Just say Free Palestine one time. One time. One time.
Call the police.
One time, Alec. You know he's a criminal. You know he's a fucking criminal. Come on, Alec, just say Free Palestine one time. One time, just one time, please, and I'll leave you alone. Free Palestine.
Alec Baldwin, who is currently being indicted on involuntary manslaughter charges for the fatal shooting of cinematographer Halyna Hutchins in 2021, went viral after Crackhead Barbie ambushed him in a coffee shop last month. Apparently, all could be forgiven and Baldwin's soul redeemed if only he would say Free Palestine. This is as performative, self-serving and sanctimonious as people spamming the phrase across random social media posts for no other reason but to virtue signal. It is just as performative, self-serving and sanctimonious as a streamer being asked not to boycott Coca-Cola, but more importantly, being asked to pretend to.
You need to stop drinking Coke Zero on stream.
Why?
It's boycott.
Wait, is it?
You're preaching pro-Palestine and you're drinking all this boycott stuff. Please, Hassan, at least pretend. Do it off stream. At least pretend. Do it off stream. Please.
Okay, I'll put it in a glass.
The hollow effects of performative activism was again brilliantly exhibited on Piers Morgan Uncensored. Multi-millionaire socialist streamer Hassan Piker and sports journalist Emily Austin collectively demonstrated what the world is regrettably becoming as a consequence of extreme identity politics being mainstreamed. This image says 1,000 words. Two extreme and entirely emotionally informed influencers who don't actually care about reaching resolutions or hearing the other side to better inform their own position, both prioritizing moral posturing above hyper-complex reality, and two normies who actually had important and informed perspectives being completely ridiculed for not being irrational and extreme enough.
I don't condemn the idea.
I've got two panelists here who've not had a word yet.
Because you're a fucking terrorist.
Please stop talking.
And I think you're a terrorist.
When you have two extreme thinkers, both of whom believe themselves to be on the right side of history, screeching terrorist at one another, while simultaneously sitting in privilege and comfort in a modern democratic country, it is not only hilarious, but mind-numbingly out of touch with the realities underpinning the word and definition terrorist. And this speaks to a real problem that performative activism has and the real harm that it is going to cause as a result. That is the invalidation of the meaning of words in order to appropriate them to the activists' own ends. The most common words that have been appropriated by performative activists and had their definitions distorted: Nazi Germany, apartheid, and who would have guessed humanitarian aid.
Why should the university be obligated to provide food to people who've taken over a building?
Well, first of all, we're saying that they're obligated to provide food to students who pay for a meal plan here.
But you mentioned that there was a request that food and water be brought in, unless I misunderstood.
To allow it to be brought in. I mean, well, I guess it's ultimately a question of what kind of community and obligation Columbia feels it has to its students. Do you want students to die of dehydration and starvation or get severely ill, even if they disagree with you? If the answer is no, then you should allow basic, I mean, it's crazy to say because we're on an Ivy League campus, but this is like basic humanitarian aid we're asking for. Like, could people please have a glass of water?
But they did put themselves in that very deliberately, in that situation and in that position. So it seems like you're sort of saying, we want to be revolutionaries, we want to take over this building, now would you please bring us food and water? And
nobody's asking them to bring anything. We're asking them to not violently stop us from bringing in basic humanitarian aid.
They're stopping the delivery of food.
We are looking for a commitment from them that they will not stop it
but
violently.
They haven't stopped it yet.
Well, I don't know to what extent it has been attempted, but we're looking for a commitment.
Apartheid, for instance, is the legalized racial segregation under one government in which one racial group deprives another racial group or other racial groups of their political and civil rights entirely. The objective of apartheid, of which there has been one official system in our modern history, my country, South Africa, is that of racial domination. Territorial occupation is inherently different to racial domination. Not just Israelis by citizenship, but also racial groups, all racial groups, whether Israeli or not, have civil rights and protections that by definition would be non-existent under an apartheid regime. And please do listen to what I am saying here, because it is very, very important. Appreciating the distinction between what is, on the one hand, an issue of territorial occupation, and on the other hand, racial supremacist segregation, does not detract from the real underlying issues and concerns related to territorial occupation. Every country, history, and complex reality is markedly different, which is why using a blanket term like apartheid is not only counterproductive, but also loses meaning, in the same way that calling people Nazis has sucked all tangible meaningfulness from the word. Whoa, whoa, whoa. But Kidology, South Africa brought a case against Israel in December. Well, there's some very good reasons why a one-party failed state riddled in corruption, gendered and racialized violence, and growing black supremacist rhetoric decided at this opportune moment to do the ultimate virtue signal. In short, it's election season, and the degenerate ruling party, the African National Congress, ANC, is doing absolutely everything in its power to cling on to its undeserved majority, including using and exploiting the legacy of Nelson Mandela, who was pro-Palestinian. All of this is in no way about Palestinians, but about trying to hold on to their undeserved and corrupt grip over South Africa.
We were very clear in our application that while we recognize under the Geneva Conventions, especially Protocol 1 of the 1977 Geneva Convention, that oppressed people have the right to use force, they cannot target civilians. Targeting of civilians is a war crime. And it's for that reason, shortly after October 7th, we approached the International Criminal Court to ask for both Hamas and those involved in the armed attacks to be investigated for war crimes under that Geneva Convention Protocol 1, but also in terms of the Rome Statute. We also asked for, of course, for Israel to be investigated for war crimes. And in the case of Israel, also because of the unfolding.
Oh, I am so happy that he said that. The virtue signaling of the South African government and judicial system is blatantly obvious when you look at the hypocrisy when it comes to South Africa actually caring about In 2015, South Africa not only welcomed but hosted and embraced with open arms then Sudanese President Omar al-Bashir. South Africa refused to arrest him when they were obliged to by the ICC and welcomed him, as I said, with open arms. Omar al-Bashir was wanted on war crimes and crimes against humanity. He is responsible for the of 300,000 non-Arab Sudanese people and children, as well as the displacement of over 2.5 million Sudanese people. This includes torture, looting, the burning of villages, and mass In January of this year, South Africa also welcomed with open arms and great enthusiasm infamous Sudanese warlord Hemeti, who has been accused of crimes against humanity and war crimes since 2004 going into 2019. These crimes include the systemic of civilians as well as violence. He is also responsible for the 2019 Khartoum massacre, which saw hundreds of Sudanese protesters terrorized, injured, and mass. I'd just like to add that only a few days ago, a UN expert said that there's not just an imminent threat of an actual genocide about to happen in Sudan right now, but that there actually potentially has already been. Basically, all I can viably infer from this is that when fellow Africans and black people commit crimes against humanity and war crimes, all is well with the world. No protests or caring about Sudan, let alone South Sudan. Sudan is, according to the UN, the worst humanitarian crisis in recent memory. But sadly, Sudan doesn't fit into the pop academic ideological frameworks of the modern world, which blame white oppressors for everything, nor does it fit into the ANC's plans to continue crippling South Africa through its particular Africanized brand of critical race theory. And with all that being said, there's absolutely no denying that Israel's air and ground campaign has completely destroyed and decimated the Gaza Strip, 35,000 Palestinians, and displaced nearly 2 million. Sadly, and I direct this specifically at South African Muslims, the reality is that the South African government doesn't care whatsoever about Palestinians. The conflict has offered the ANC an opportunity that it can capitalize on by reigniting the paranoia and memory of apartheid in the imaginations of South Africans. I mean, do we want to end up back in the state that Palestinians are currently in? The case against Israel will do absolutely nothing, irrespective of the outcome, to alleviate the suffering of Palestinians either now or in the future. All it has done, and will viably do, is help the ANC, over 4,000 miles away from Palestine, to garner favor with South African voters so that they can continue their mission of destroying South Africa from within. All it will do is give virtue signalers more to virtue signal about from the comfort of their smartphones. The circle jerk of virtue signaling continues miles and miles away from where people are actually suffering in ways that we cannot possibly comprehend.
Now, Esther, this is one of the problems I have with this whole debate, is that increasingly it just descends into a screaming match between pro-Palestinians and pro-Israelis.
And the biggest losers are the victims of this war. 33,000 dead Palestinians, over 1,500 dead Israelis. These are the biggest victims of this, because you're shouting at each other and nothing is getting, like, you're completely, forget having no courtesy for us, you're completely disrespecting actual victims of this conflict, which, by the way, didn't happen in a vacuum. And I think that's the most important thing to say. None of this happened in a vacuum. Of course, October the 7th was an atrocity, and it was completely unjustified. There was no justification for butchering people in the way that they did. But it didn't happen in a vacuum. So I despise this, you're a terrorist sympathizer, you're a genocide supporter, all of this, when really the people that we should be talking about deserve better.
What do you say is the main goal with tonight's protest?
I think the goal is just showing our support for Palestine and demanding that NYU stops. I honestly don't know all of what NYU's doing.
Is there something that NYU's doing?
I really don't know. I'm pretty sure do you know what NYU's doing? About what? About Israel. Why are we protesting here?
Palestine will be free!
I wish I was more educated.
You know, this clip and so many others like it are indicative of how ill-informed we are as a public, not just on what we are reading and the media that we are engaging with, but also about the inherent nature of the news articles that we are reading and engaging with. We are never encouraged, let alone given the resources, to actually uncover the bias and factuality behind a story. And that is why I have been using Ground News. Ground News is an app and website that gives you access to over 50,000 news news sources. And why this is important is because this access is representative of the entire political spectrum. What makes Ground News unique is that you aren't just reading a story or news article completely void of its crucial context, which is what reading the news is way too often like. Instead, you can compare headlines, coverage, ownership of the source material, and where the bias lies per article. Now, if we look at this story about pro-Palestinian demonstrators at UCLA, we can see a full media breakdown. We can see the number of sources covering the story, as well as the bias distribution across publications. Reading about pro-Palestinian protests has been daunting, yet being able to get a concise but also in-depth breakdown of a story has been so crucial to not feeling overwhelmed by the news, but also not losing the quality of what you are getting from your news stories. Ground News has really helped me to get the full picture on reporting of these protests. Just look at how differently the left and the right both cover the exact same story. And it's been so important to me to be able to read an article such as this one from the Times of Israel, to copy and paste it into Ground News, and to then get a breakdown about the factuality, about the bias of the story, to get that information that I otherwise would not know and would not get. Ground News' use of not just national but international sources such as these has just added to my depth of knowledge and critical thinking, and it is right at my fingertips. One of my favorite Ground News features is the blind spot feature, which shows you news stories that are being disproportionately covered by one side of the political spectrum. It's been interesting to see that the right has little to no coverage into how Middle Eastern media coverage has pivoted to a focus on US college protests after weeks of non-stop Israel-Hamas war coverage. These protests are clearly important in the Middle East, and thanks to Ground News, I can see that this is really not being conveyed as readily to right-leaning audiences. Now, there is no better way to practice critical thinking than with Ground News, and in this day and age, critical thinking is vital. So don't forget to use my link or my QR code showing on screen right now to get your subscription at 40% off unlimited access this month with the Vantage subscription. In a blog post, social psychologist Jonathan Haidt wrote the following. Aristotle often evaluated a thing with respect to its telos, its purpose, end, or goal. The telos of a knife is to cut. The telos of a physician is health or healing. What is the telos of a university? The most obvious answer is truth. The word appears on so many university crests, but increasingly, many of America's top universities are embracing social justice as their telos, or as a second and equal telos. He argues that since the marketization of higher education since the 1980s, but especially since 2015, when student protests at over 80 universities led to the implementation of mandatory social justice programs, initiatives, and incentives, the conflict between social justice and truth has been unmanageable. I would argue further by saying that the modern elite university has chosen not social justice over truth, but performative social justice over truth and social justice. Like Dr. Haidt, I believe that truth is the only way that we can pursue activism that will effectively enhance social justice. Unfortunately, this most definitely has not been the case. Instead, identity politics and performative activism, both of which require no backing of truth, are pursued by the university as a means to social justice that are entirely hollow and surface level. And nothing proves this more than the weird rise in academics feigning racial identities which they are not. And I would say that the reason for this is because the modern elite university has been very successful at marketing and selling itself to prospective students and staff members alike as being for social justice, when in actual fact, it is merely a business. Nothing proves this more than the recent wave of student protests, occupations, and encampments emerging and spreading throughout Western university campuses in protest against Israel's military action in Gaza. From Ivy League campuses to Oxbridge, students have, in my humble opinion, been acting out of a genuine sense of anger and powerlessness when it comes to what is happening in the world today. The police response in some instances has been excessive, and students most definitely have a right to protest and to express their discontentedness. And by saying that students have that right, I do mean all students. students, irrespective of their allegiance when it comes to this conflict. Something which clearly not all students are taking on board.
Attention, everyone. Can I get everyone to form a human chain right here, please? We have Zionists that have entered the camp. Mic check! Repeat after me. We have Zionists. Who have entered the camp. We are going to create a human chain. Where I am standing. So that they do not pass this point. And infringe upon our privacy. And try to disrupt our community. Please join me in this chain.
You see how hostile this is? And you're asking me not to record?
Walk and take a step forward.
Yeah, I absolutely feel threatened right now.
So that we can start to push them out of the camp. One step forward. Another step forward.
Do I believe that these protests will have any tangible impact aside from cementing greater divisions, greater hostility, anti-Semitism, Islamophobia, and instilling the most toxic traits of identity politics in respective groups and individuals? No. But what these protests and encampments have shown is how the modern university has created a leviathan of students as consumers who believe themselves to be social justice warriors that are now turning against it. And you know that things are bad when student protests are being met not just with skepticism and anger from the wider society, but with lawsuits beyond the budgets of many elite colleges. In 1964, anti-Vietnam War protests originated from these exact college campuses. The feeling and sentiment from the public around these protests was very different to what it is today. By 1967, most of America was on their side. I doubt the same can or will be said about these ones. While students protest on Ivy League and elite college campuses, online disdain for them is rampant. And this online disdain can be summed up as follows. Basically, American confidence in higher education as a force for not just worth, but for good has plummeted. Not just among Republicans, but importantly and significantly among Democrats and liberals equally. And this plummet is perfectly summed up by this now infamous trio. Americans in the 1990s probably never thought that three accomplished academics and executive leaders at the world's top universities could look as foolish and inept as tobacco executives who themselves sat before Congress and tried to convince the public that tobacco and nicotine were good for you actually. Plenty of faculty, both at Harvard and at other elite universities, insist that hard-right Republicans and other rabble-rousers are fabricating controversies. Stirring up animosity toward pointy-headed elites can win them political advantage, but thoughtful insiders acknowledge that for some years, elite universities, particularly those within the Ivy League, have grown detached from ordinary Americans, not to mention unmoored from their own academic and meritocratic values. America's great universities are losing the public's trust, warns Robert George, a legal scholar and philosopher at Princeton, and it is not the public's fault. Elite universities are a peculiar beacon of the current culture wars. Moral certainty is guaranteed, and all resulting divisions are blamed on external forces and bodies, the other that is not the modern university. Responsibility is always somebody else's problem, and as I said, in a very short span of time, and as a result of this attitude, trust and confidence in higher education has dropped exponentially. When you hear about university protests at some of the world's most expensive and elite universities that enjoy the world's most ludicrous tax breaks known to man, recognition of a common cause and goal is clearly lost on a general public whom these institutions intentionally exclude and moralize over. The modern university has turned into an upper middle class haven, even though it is nowadays full of a growing surprisingly diverse demographic. This diversity is more so in wealthy international student body makeup than it is in class. Identity politics is proving itself to allow many a diverse student, many of whom come from wealthy and privileged backgrounds, the space to enjoy the privileges of elitism whilst cosplaying struggle, activism, and oppression. Columbia students demanding basic humanitarian aid was something, and yet another example of the deplorable appropriation of very important and meaningful words in the name of performance. Princeton University students conducting a hunger strike on rotation and then complaining about being hungry was also very, very interesting.
This is absolutely unfair. My peers and I, we are starving. We are physically exhausted. I am quite literally shaking right now, as you can see. We are both cold and hot at the same time. We are all immunocompromised. And based on the university's meeting yesterday with some of our bargaining team, they would love to continue physically weakening us because they can't stand to say no to unjust.
And this is yet another perfect instance of how students are consumers. The truth of the matter is that the modern university is the institutionalization of virtue signaling and performance activism. Virtue signaling has made the modern university as business very, very wealthy. It has, however, meant that students are, above all else, not curious minds looking to learn about a world they don't know, but consumers, oftentimes convinced that they already know the world because of ideologies which have predetermined how the world already is. There are oppressors and the oppressed. There are black people and white people, both literally and figuratively. The university simultaneously produces and reinforces this. The customer is always right. These current protests cannot possibly fathom the existence of a black and Native American Jewish student, which is proved by how readily dismissed such a student was by the political left.
So you describe yourself as black, Native American, and Jewish. Mm-hmm. You've talked about how your feelings of feeling accepted on the campus changed after October 7th. What has that been like?
It's been really difficult. Again, I went through a lot of this grief process and primarily experiencing this issue in the first semester. That's when I learned that the community that I felt previously so accepted by, specifically because of my identities, all of this was actually conditional, and the one condition is my Jewish identity, which I assumed was also another reason why I was so uplifted, because the Jewish people are a significant minority.
And no doubt, consumers aren't always in agreement, and the university is incapable of doing anything consistent or tangible about it because of its own model of operation. Right now, you can't keep Jewish students as consumers happy and Intifada students as consumers happy. The modern university therefore has to take a side, but as a business, it convincingly cannot. And many of them are currently reckoning with how impossible it is to deal with a virtue signaling mess of their own making.
You see your faculty members, professors, they today linked hands and arms, and they blocked the entrance to the encampment. When you saw that, what do you think of their position? I'm
disgusted, honestly, if only because, again, the situation has gotten so out of hand that no matter how you look at it, even if we're taking out the political element, the anti-Semitic element even, it is just absolute anarchy on campus. And to see that faculty are supporting this, and in a way that is, in this instance today, they were barring students who, in my opinion, you could consider them to be paying for these lawns. They're barring students from enjoying the resources that we all have a right to. So that alone is just absolutely inexcusable to be seen from faculty.
The identity politics that has been a staple of the modern university, specifically the modern elite university, is a key aspect factor in our increasingly polarizing culture and, as a result, moral wars. The manifestation of this polarization and moral warfare has been on full display lately. Rather than being the voice of reason, wherein critique and openness to the crucial place of diverse, differing perspectives and thoughts reign, the modern elite university has become as extreme, as puritanical, as detached from reality as the right-wing enemies it is seemingly fighting against. Because at the end of the day, identity politics is just clique politics. And young people are inevitably the most susceptible to wanting to feel a part of something, to wanting to be included in something, even when they don't really know what it is that they are a part of.
This is a reminder to everyone who tells Jewish girls who do not actively support a that they're capos, you're boring. You're just really boring and like lazy and unoriginal. You bring shame on your ancestors. You're actually a apologist, which makes you the capoiest of all.
Capo is a slur that is used against Jews who are deemed to not be good enough supporters of Israel or of Zionism. It is, again, deplorable to call anybody a slur, irrespective of their political or cultural beliefs. Nobody should be calling other people slurs at all, irrespective of what side of the political aisle you are on. But it definitely doesn't help to call people slurs in response to them calling you slurs. Is basically the moral of the story here. It's similar to when other black people call black people the C word. It is just as revolting, just as disgusting, just as hypocritical, and just a very, very sad testament to where we are as a society.
And you know what makes me like cool and fun and not boring? Not being a apologist. Like, truly, is there anything hotter than people that are in the Palestinian liberation movement? Is there anything hotter than an anti-Zionist? The reason I get to glow like this is the universe is blessing me for actively resisting a.
So with that logic, is the universe not blessing Palestinians who are actually actively trying to resist being? I can expect this level of absolute stupidity from a first-year university student, but from a PhD student, this is a heartbreaking representation of being a doctoral student. The epidemic of virtue signaling hurts us all. It is a horrifying realization to observe that these days there is more social capital in extreme moralizing than there is in actual material things, in actual tangible political change and compromise. Signaling virtue has, at least on the internet, become some kind of new class divide, and it is regrettably seeping offline. There is no better example of this than the progressive left's undeniable disdain for the working classes, or the online right's interest in the working classes and marginalized groups, only when it's to stick it to the woke SJWs. In the UK, the Labour Party, emphasis on labour, have been doing better amongst the professional middle classes than the manual working class since 2015. The poorest Americans are also the least likely to vote by a long shot, and it isn't because of transportation issues, as the left likes to incessantly argue. It is because of one very important, albeit oftentimes overlooked reason: political disillusionment. I only bring all of this up because of how similar it is in logic to the modern university's own dealings with its own failures. Trust in higher education isn't down because of what we, the echo chamber and audience captured university as business, have done and have become. Instead, as Judith Butler has recently argued, it is obviously because there is a war on gender that has become a phantasm for totalitarianism and authoritarianism, and is at the core of the right's culpability in a culture war that the modern university, marginalized identities, and social justice in general are the victims of. It is so sad to see such an incredible intellectual fall down this lazy rabbit hole. But just like with Jordan Peterson, it happens to them all after enough ego inflation. And that is just to say that virtue signaling divides. It doesn't bring together. Instead of being happy that a fellow streamer whose politics you don't agree with has pledged thousands and thousands of dollars to help Palestinians, it is better to call him a racial slur and to treat such indispensable money as chump change.
Where were you 7 fucking months ago? White saviors is like, oh yeah, you know,
Me, I donated $10,000, but I'm not going to promote it. Just don't say you donated $10,000 then. Look, if you're not actively believing, if you don't believe in the cause, and if you're not against genocide at this point, like, keep your fucking money. Keep your $10,000. Keep your little chump change. Like, the fuck?
It is totally fine when your high school clique of content creator friends donate. But remember, at the root of all of this is moral posturing and sticking it to America and her capitalist allies. It is not Palestinians. The important thing in all of this is who is talking, ignorantly, mind you, about the Israel-Palestinian war. Not whether what is being talked about or how it is being talked about is actually serving any kind of actual cause or long-term resolution. Both there and here when it comes to the culture wars.
Israel is white supremacy. Israel is nationalism. The things that Israel stands for and what Zionism stands for is in line with what Nazis believed. And that's why we say Zionism is inherently white supremacist because when it was founded, its goal was Jewish supremacy. Its goal was an ethno-state in Palestine. It has nothing to do with actual Judaism. Okay, it's nothing. It's not rooted in religion. Let's be real. It's a Western imperialist project to destabilize the region. Yes, and it hides under the guise of religion and of Judaism. It's the same shit we do here with like Christianity, you know?
Quick question.
Yes.
Jesus Christ.
What about Jesus Christ?
That's where he's from. Nazareth.
Yeah. Yeah.
What was the demographics back then?
That would have been
Year zero.
Just about,
yeah.
Just about BC. It would have been a mix of Palestinians, Palestinians, Arabs, Jews, and Christians.
It was a mix of people in this area.
But Palestine,
and that changed over time.
Well, yes, but under
they got along back then?
Yes. So this is a common misconception, okay? People think that Muslims, that Arabs and Jews have been feuding for centuries, when in reality...
Wait a minute. How can there be Christians before Jesus?
This is Caroline Quinn, by the way, irresponsibly and I would hope obliviously spreading misinformation and anti-Semitism because performative activism is supreme. I mean, when you're going to Twitch streamers on your campuses as a go-to news source, you know things have hit rock bottom. I implore you in this cultural climate to do your absolute best when it is clear that so many are doing intentionally their absolute worst. Thank you so much for watching this video, and as I said at the beginning of this video, thank you so much for giving me the time of day. I would love to hear your opinions, your perspectives, respectfully down in the comment section. I know that this is a very heated time for a lot of people, whether they are directly or indirectly involved or affiliated with what is going on in the world. So I do implore you to be respectful, to be kind, and to think of others and to treat others the way that you yourself would like to be treated. Thank you again for watching this video, and thank you to all of my patrons and to Ground News for kindly sponsoring this video. And I'll see all of you very, very soon in the next one.